First of all, welcome to all of you on behalf of Jimin Park, my co-author, and myself. I am Patrick Messeler. Jimin Park is professor at Malaya University in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. But above all, he's a Korean, so he knows very well the Korean film industry. And we have worked during the last 6 years on this film industry in comparison between Korea, France, UK, and a few other countries. So we will have one PowerPoint, and so Jimin will go from one slide to the PowerPoint when I will talk. Jimin, you want to say a few words? No?
It's all right. Let's go.
Okay. So could you show the PowerPoint?
Sure.
Thank you very much. So this is, again, a study which has taken a long time because it was very difficult to have a long-term view on the film industry. And in fact, it was a very interesting study because we just learned many things that was not begun to be known now, but were not known in 5 years ago. So next slide, please. Well, maybe some of you are old enough, at least I am old enough to remember the film industry as the nightmare of the trade negotiations. The trade negotiators were really fearing about this industry. And for the economists, it was also a sector which was relatively difficult to handle because there was the idea that subsidies are free. They should protect and subsidize on behalf of the culture at any cost and for any reason. So no constraint. Now, why Korea? It happens that Korea is the first, and I think the only one, live experiment of a successful film liberalization. And Korea started to liberalize its film industry under the pressure of the American guns in 1988. So it was not willing to do so. It was forced to do so. And it has done so with a very difficult situation. It was still a developing country. And it's a very successful liberalization because, as you know, now Korea has many cultural success in a number of films with a great attention in the world. So, but what people don't realize is that, in fact, in Korea, the Korean film industry is now an industrial powerhouse. And we are economists. Jimin is from the business side, I'm from the trade side, and we wanted really to look at the aspect of this industrial powerhouse. And in fact, the powerhouse, well, this powerhouse was based on 2 points. The two pillars, each has done its work. The Korean government has basically followed a stable pro-competition policy, opening step by step with dismantling import quota that was under the pressure of the American film industry, then cutting screen quota later, 2006, and then setting up a very prudent and sound use of subsidies. We will come back later on this stuff, without putting too excessively restricting domestic regulation. So a very cautious approach of the government and stable. They never changed their mind. When they open, they keep that open. But the second pillar was probably more important, at least from our point of view is more important, is the role of the Korean film companies, which have been, in fact, the leading actors of this success, because they have been able to develop strategies in terms of production. And we will insist more, Jimin will insist more on the second pillar, which is exhibition. The exhibition sector now is very important because not only you have the traditional movie studios, but you have TV channels producing film, and you have, of course, streaming companies producing. So you have very new actors, and the Koreans have been the first one to integrate, if I can use this word, nicely all these conflicting interests. Next slides, please. Now, first, just show of what happened to the Korean film industry. The diagram is the growth measured by the box office revenue per capita in constant US dollars, of course. And then you have a few countries. And what you see, this is the blue curve, and the blue curve is really totally astonishing. After the liberalization, this is the 1988 elimination of the import quota. Then you have for a few years, a decade, something which was not very clear, you know, sort of stagnation. We will come back later. And then suddenly, 10 years later, boom, the Korean film industry in terms of box office revenue per capita was really catching up and then overtaking all the other countries, including the US at the end. This is really, so this arrow is the liberalization, initial liberalization, and this arrow, the second arrow on the right side, this is the US-Korea free trade agreement. And you can see that the free trade agreement was in fact signed when the US industry was going not so well. So the reason was not to open the Korean market, contrary to the first time, it was rather try to solve some problems of the US film industry. It's not our topic, but we could, of course, answer questions. And for those who want to ask questions, please don't hesitate. You have the chat room, or you can ask the floor, I think, if I'm right. Next slide. Okay, you can say, oh, that's growth, that's perfect. But in fact, the Koreans are producing all the same movies, and this is just no cultural diversity. Well, this two diagrams shows, in fact, that the Koreans have been able to grow their industry and to have a much better industry with a much higher cultural diversity than, in fact, at the right. This is the French case. Why I can say that is that the blue curve, which is the sum of the two curves, the growth of the box office revenue for the Korean films in red, and the box office revenue of the US film shown in Korea, both we are on the Korean market on the left side. You can see that after the takeoff of the global, the takeoff of this global growth is based on the growth on both sides, both the US films and the Koreans, the domestic films. There was not one source of film which has overtaken the other one. So it's something that, in fact, shows what the definition of and the interest of the Korean in terms of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity for them in Korea means that you have the possibility to watch the maximum number of films, whatever the origin. There is no question about the origin. This is not a problem. The problem is just to be exposed to all the films in order to have a good knowledge of the films. And then the Korean movie watchers are good enough in terms of knowledge of the movies to tell to the Korean movie writers, movie producers, which kind of movies they feel good. So in some sense, in Korea, and this is Mickey Lee in the awards ceremony for Parasite, say, we just want to thank our Korean movie watcher. They had told us what to do, what not to do. I don't know any French movie producer thanking the French people for giving them the idea about what to do, what not to do. So, and we put here very quickly these slides. You can compare these slides where, in fact, the French movie market was flat during all these years, and it was flat a little bit for the US film, but even more for the French film. So in some sense, no inertia on the French market. And the reason is that we have made many liberalization and then counter-liberalization, so nobody knows exactly where we are. We'll come back later. Next slides, please. Of course, I mentioned essentially the quota and this kind of stuff, you know very well in terms of tariff, but the highest source of protection in the film industry is subsidies. There are many reasons for that. A few people could read the cartoon on the right in French, and I put the translation on the left. And so they are very happy. Everything is going fine. They have the subsidy. They have we can begin to shoot. We have the stars. And then one guy say here in this stuff, but what for? We don't have any script. And this was, when it was published in 2014, it was really a cartoon which made a very bad impression on the rest of the people. But I want to convey, I think, a change in the mentality, at least on the French side, is that more and more voices are against subsidies. They understand that we have given subsidy in France, 600 to 800 millions of euros every year for nothing. You know, the market share of the French film has not increased. The success on the world market has not been tremendous. And the reason for this opposition on voice in terms of subsidies has been exacerbated by something maybe some of you are knowledgeable in terms of film industry, which is the real topic of fight for the coming 10 years, which is called the chronology des médias, of medias. What is the chronology of medias? You have 20, 40 years ago, you have movie studios and theaters. That was it. That was the landscape. Today, besides movie studios, you have film TV channels, you have streaming companies of all kinds. And so you have many, many investors, co-investors at the same time in the film industry. So who should show the film the first? Do you want to show the film first in theaters, or first in channel, or first in streaming services? The problem is the same, in fact, in the US. The streaming company, or Disney, as a Disney Plus, wants to show the movies very quickly on the streaming subsidiary, rather than on theater. So the problem is not very different, but the fact is very different in Europe because of the subsidies, which means that there should be some regulation on who could go first to show the movie. And this is a terrible dilemma for the industry itself. Next slide, please. Well, in fact, the current exception, not only very good results, box office revenue, but in fact, when you look at the input, very much less subsidies and better subsidies. On the diagram, you can really see much less subsidies. Basically, Korea industry, film industry today is the same size as the French industry, and you can see that on 2016, they were giving 1/4 of the French subsidies, so much less subsidies than in Europe. And in fact, we did not provide any substantive figure for that in these slides, but the subsidies have been much better designed, so less subsidies and better subsidies. Why such an exception? Two reasons. One is a circumstance. Until the early 2000s, it was just impossible, politically speaking, to subsidize the film industry. You know, the country was trying to develop its manufacturing stuff, and the film industry has always been put aside for making the manufacturing stuff the golden gem of the Korean economy. But after the late 90s, the reason for the refusal or the minimum amount of subsidies is that the main leader of the success of the film industry in Korea were, in fact, the film companies, the large film companies, Chaebol. I mean, sorry, the film subsidiary of the large company, Chaebol. So these guys were telling to the government, well, thank you very much. We are doing very well our business. We don't need public money, because for them, they really understood very quickly that public money could be also public links, public supervision, and they wanted to keep their own business as they wish. In fact, they have done a very complicated adjustment process in 88, 90s, when the film was liberated from import quota. All the old guys disappeared, all the old films disappeared. It took 10 years for the new companies to come in the film industry. And these new companies were, in fact, these subsidiaries of the chaebols, who understand there was a lot of money to earn by doing good films. So they were working very hard to make good films. And for that, they learned the business by going to Los Angeles and to California. Next slides. Now you can tell me, oh, well, that's euros and stuff like that. That doesn't make much sense. What is the quality of the films? And I think it's not a big surprise that many people believe that the Korean films are not of good quality. So they may be attractive, so people want to go and to see, but they go out of the movie theaters disappointed. That will be bad qualities. So quality means something which you need to look to watch the movies. Attractiveness means you heard about good news from a movie. It's a completely different period of time. So we need, because of that, we need an expert indicator. We need the impression, the feeling of the Korean movie watcher about how they rate the film they have seen. And there is a website, which are aggregated website, IMDb, MC, and Rotten Tomatoes, RT. And they have very different way to rate the movies. They have very different way to aggregate this stuff. But they provide, this is the figures going from 2008 to 2018. So it's 10 years. I don't remember how many films, but a lot of films and a lot of ratings, a lot of people, you know, probably this site. And then you can see that it was a shock for us, because it was so clear that, in fact, the Korean film industry is rated by the movie watcher better than the other industries, including the French, are partly badly treated by this comparison. Next slide, please. Now, my last slide before giving the floor to Jimin is to start a little bit about the exhibition sector. And here there is something which shocked a lot the people in outside Korea, indeed inside Korea. Jimin mentioned, he says this sector, exhibition sector, is very highly concentrated. 90% of the movie theaters are owned by 3 companies. And in fact, when you look at the 3 companies, they have a lot of vertical integration. So they do from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, they have ownership, full ownership. This was a kind of traditional approach of the chaebols. They do that in many sectors in which they operate. It's not, of course, what we know in Europe, what we have in Europe, completely different. And it's not even what they have in US because of antitrust law. And in fact, you know very well that vertical integration is a way to dominate risk. If you know what happened from step 0 to final step for a film, you have a good idea, a better idea where the film has failed, what has going wrong, or what is going well. So the vertical integration is something which is, in terms of information, very useful. Of course, vertical integration means the exhibition sector is 90% of the movie theaters, and there are a lot of criticism, and Jimin will talk about that, but screen monopoly. The 3 large companies have a screen monopoly. Now, let's leave aside Korea and just compare France and Korea. And we have 2 tables, older films and the case of hit films. Jimin will go further in further detail. You can see that, in fact, in Korea, we have average number of released films per inhabitant, 20% more in Korea compared to France. The growth rate is higher, 57%. And in terms of admission is 10%. Basically, the Korean film market on the whole, all the films, is much larger than the French market. And they have done, in terms of exhibition, they have done that with, in Korea, basically half of the screen in France. So when you compare this figure, you means that there is a much more efficient way to attract the movie watcher, to make them enter the cinema and then to take the next group of theaters in Korea than in France. Jimmy will use the expression turnover. The turnover in the global film industry is really much higher in Korea than in France. Now, my last point is about the hit films, the leaders. I think this is all the films with more than 1 million of watchers. Then here, it's more interesting, you have the same phenomenon. Korea is more efficient, but which is interesting is cultural diversity aspect. Because in fact, you have less US hints in Korea than in France, and more domestic hints in Korea than in France. So this is cultural diversity, French style. And then you have, in terms of, when you look at all the films, you have more release film in Korea and more animation in Korea than in France. So this is, the Korean definition of diversity. People are exposed to a lot of foreign films, including, they don't look really foreign versus domestic. They have to watch, and to be educated. And in fact, in terms of admission, you can see that in fact, less US hints in Korea and more, I'm sorry. Yes, US hint in Korea and more domestic hints in Korea compared to France, which is cultural diversity, French style. You have more domestic films compared to the foreign films. So that really raised the question about the quality of the efficiency of the exhibition sector. On this, I leave the floor to Jimin to go further on this point. Thank you very much. Mike.
All right, thank you, Patrick. When it comes to Korean film industry, actually, people, they have a tendency to emphasize the Korean government policies for the film industry. However, one thing we don't talk much about it, actually, it is a film producers, the company. Okay, so basically you can see here, there's a lot of films, but one of the commonality among these films, actually, they are all produced by big companies in Korea. And this is very important because the big companies in Korea, they are considered as a chaebol. So that means basically they cannot receive any single penny from Korean government. Because when it comes to Korean government's film subsidies, it is for small and medium-sized companies. Okay, so that means basically these big companies, without receiving any subsidies from the government, however, they were able to produce a lot of films. And these films are the one that gain a lot of international popularity here and there, and they are the one who led the Korean wave or the Hallyu. Okay, actually, Patrick mentioned something about the monopoly. So actually, this is one of the big debates in Korea. And then actually, whenever I deliver a lecture about Korean film industry, a lot of people, they also argue that, hey, well, it looks, I mean, you try to explain that, Korean film industry is doing well, but actually we know that there is some problem with, monopoly. So basically, three big companies, they are, monopolizing the whole industry. For that one, actually, people, they usually use the HHI index, which is, Herfindahl, Hirschman index. So basically, it's not just a few people, but actually Korean Film Council, which is like CNC of France. So they are using these kind of things in comparing Korea with other countries such as France, Germany, Japan, and the United States, and try to say that, hey, actually Korea has highest HHI index, which means basically Korea has a huge problem with monopoly. Okay, so that means basically usually when we compare this one, there are two sectors. The first one is actually exhibition, and the second one that is distribution. Okay, so here I compare the distribution of HHI with other countries. So as you can see here, when it comes to distribution, Korea is around 50%. Actually, if you compare this one with other countries, you see this is pretty good. So basically, when it comes to distribution, Korea does not show any monopoly compared to other countries. Now, the issue is actually exhibition. So basically, here I wrote the CR3. That means basically top 3 companies, their portion in the market. So if we compare Korea and France, you can see that Korea's, monopoly, ratio is almost like a 97%. Let's say just 100%. On the other side, the French, the monopoly rate is like around 50%. So by these numbers, a lot of Korean people, they argue that actually Korea has a huge problem with monopoly. However, I argue actually, when you understand monopoly, you have to be really, really, really careful about it. Because as I said before, a lot of people, they are arguing, monopoly of Korean film industries by using HHI index. But actually, this one depends on the number of companies. So basically, it doesn't matter if they are doing well or not, but as long as you have a lot of companies, then usually the HHI index is getting lower. If you have just a small number of companies, basically it is higher. So one of the reasons that Korea has high HHI index in exhibition sector, because we do have 3 main companies. However, it doesn't mean that Korea has a monopoly situation because, people, they misunderstand somehow the film industry. They believe that Jabil are in competition with small and medium-sized companies. But actually, this is not true because, when it comes to film industry, actually, each film doesn't matter where they are from and which company produced. Actually, each film are in competition with another film. So basically, here I, argue, film VWXYZ, and then there is a V-W- whatever. So this is produced by small and medium-sized companies, and the people they are arguing film VWXYZ are competing with film V-W-X-Y-G-. But my argument, no, this is not the case. Actually, even though all the films are produced by big companies, but then even the films produced by companies, they are in competition. So it's not necessarily about, big companies and small companies, but you have to understand this is like a film vis-a-vis other films. Okay, now let's go back to the distribution sector. This is interesting. Actually, when it comes to distribution, we do have a lot of companies in Korea, just like in France. Because it's not because of France has a lot of companies or Korea has less companies, but because there's a lot of US studios who do direct distribution in France as well as in Korea. So this is the thing. So another interesting thing is actually when it comes to distribution in France, number 1 and 2, that is Walt Disney and then Warner Bros. So you can see the market share in distribution. When it comes to Korea, actually Walt Disney is number 1 among foreign distributors. And then Fox is number 2 among foreign distributors, just like France. However, when it comes to market share, this is very interesting. You can see here the market share of these 2 companies in France and Korea. You can see that the number is pretty much the same. However, the interesting thing is actually the market share of Korean companies in distribution. That means basically CJ company, Korean company, Lotte and Showbox, they are producing good films, and then they are the one who distribute it, and then actually they are well distributed, in the film industry. So this is why, the Korean films, so more like domestic films, are really popular, okay, or well circulated. Now, when it comes to exhibition, this is more interesting. As we already highlighted, there are three companies like CJCGV, okay, and then Lotte and Megabox. So basically, these three companies, they are the one who distribute, all the films in Korean film industry. So basically, the movie theater. On the other side, when it comes to France, there's a lot of different companies. Okay, so now you can see here that if Korean government really want to make the HHI index lower, that means basically we need to increase the number of companies in exhibition sector. But then, in the free market or capitalized market, the companies who would like to join the exhibition, it's a company's will. It's not government will. So that means basically there's not that many companies who are interested in, interested in playing in the exhibition sector because they are already a lot of, big companies. Also, I wonder sometimes if Korean government is ready to open this exhibition market to foreign players. So let's say if we have a lot of foreign players when it comes to exhibition market, that means, we can lower the HHI index without any problem. Another interesting, when it comes to Korea, because people, they argue, the three companies, they are basically monopolizing the industry. So basically, we do not have a lot of diversity. When it comes to diversity issues, actually, Korea pick up France a lot. There are a lot of reasons why, because when it comes to cultural diversity and exception, of course, people know that France and Canada are very famous for that. Another reason why Korean government and Korean people, they compare Korea with France, because in terms of market size, Korea and France is very similar, although there's a little bit difference, in population. Actually, since 2016, Korea's, box office size is larger than France. So this is very interesting. Anyway, well, here, in order to show that Korea has more diversity, okay, and then we show more films compared to France, I compared the number of films. Here you can see that the numbers here 647 in 2019, and then France releases almost like a 746 films. So it looks like France released more than Korea. But then another thing interesting, we need to consider the market size. But basically, Korea's market size is, it's 50 million people in Korea. On the other side, when it comes to France, France has much larger population. That means basically, if we consider the number of a population in France and Korea, actually per person, Korea releases more film than France. Okay. Another interesting thing is actually the number of screens. Okay. When it comes to number of screens in Korea, this is the data from 2019. We do have around 3,000 screens. On the other side, France has almost 6,000. So basically, France has twice more in terms of screen numbers. However, Korea has more number of, release a lot of films. And then Korea has more number of admission. You can see here, the number here, admission. Okay. The interesting thing is actually Korea, number of screens in Korea is half of the number in France. But another interesting number is actually the number of seats. Okay, so when it comes to number of seats, Korea has 463,000 seats in 2019. By contrast, in France, it has almost 1,100 seats. This is the unit is 1,000. Okay, so basically France has a lot of things. However, when it comes to the films industry market size, Korea is much bigger, and this is very interesting why. Now, we compared the diversity. So basically, we collected the number of films that gained more than 1 million admissions. So you can see here in Korea, up, and then down, there is France. The interesting thing is actually, when it comes to the total number of hit, so basically, that has more than 1 million admissions. In terms of number, actually, France and Korea is very similar. For example, in 2019, Korea has 49 films that has more than 100 million admission. By contrast, in France, it has 51 films. So basically, it's the same. However, the interesting thing is like if you consider the nationality, so basically out of 49 films, Korean films has almost 30. Okay. On the other side, in France, actually around 30 films, they are US films. Okay. So that means basically, although the number of film released in Korea and France is pretty much the same. However, Korean films are more popular in Korea, and then US films are more popular in France. Well, here it is very important because when it comes to US films, actually the number of films, I mean, not the number of films, I mean, the kind of films, the title of films are pretty much similar in both countries. That means basically, Korean films and French films, they are in competition with same US films. That means basically, then that highlights the issue of quality. So basically the quality of Korean films and the quality of French films from consumer perspective. This is very important. When it comes to diversity, some people, they are arguing, hey, well, you're talking about the big hit, which has more than 100 million, but actually you also need to calculate, or you have to consider, films that does not attract a lot of people. This is very important. Okay, here is the number. Actually, you can see here the non-hit number, and then this is the French number. So you can see that in Korea, there's a more number of non-hit films. So even we compare hit films and non-hit films, Korea has more films in terms of numbers. So basically, there's more diversity. Okay. Another interesting, however, some people argue that, hey, okay, you release a lot of non-hit films in Korea, but then when it comes to admission, actually, the number is almost half of French numbers. So some people argue that, actually, the Korean people, maybe they prefer to watch commercialized films. But actually, this is not true. Because in Korea, we do not have chronological media. That means basically, as soon as we release the film on movie theater, and if they are not popular, and then the companies, they can shift from movie theater to other outlets as soon as possible. That means basically Korean people, they already know that if the film is not really popular at movie theater, that means basically sooner or later, probably 1 week later or 2 weeks later, we can enjoy the film on streaming website or internet with paying just less money. So basically, Korean people, they know how to use money wisely compared to French films. Hold on a second, but it looks like I'm inserting, French audience, but actually this is not, I'm not inserting the French audience. Actually, one of the reasons that it happened, it is due to the French regulation. The name is chronological media. Okay. All right. Another interesting, I mentioned that Korea has half of screens when compared with France, and also in terms of seat numbers, Korea has less. But then it is interesting that actually in terms of admission number, Korea has more, okay? And then Korea show more films. Then how it could happen, all right? Actually, the answer is turnover. Turnover means basically, because here in France, because there is a chronology media, and then some films, although they are not popular, but they have to be in the movie theater for certain, duration. But in Korea, this is not the case, okay? From Korean movie theaters perspective, they want to screen popular, films as soon as possible. And then once they make the market saturated with these popular films, and then they want to shift to another film. So that means basically the turnover in Korea is much faster than other countries. So this is the thing. For example, usually top 5 US films, okay, with 1 week, in Korea, these films has almost 50% of the total box office revenue in week 1. In week 4 here, it's 95%. That means basically week 4 or week 5, that means basically they are done. So there's no more revenue expected. So that means basically after week 5 or week 4, the movie theater, they try to show another film. Okay, so that means basically if you calculate the sequence and then the number of films projected per year in Korea, it's more than in France. Okay, here, this is another interesting thing. I just came up with a very specific name. So basically here in Korea, the Avengers, the Endgame, which is released in 2019. So basically week 3 and week 4, you can see there is the number is almost 100%. So basically after 3 or 4 weeks later, Korean movie theater, a lot of movie theater, they are ready to stop showing Avengers and they are ready for new films. However, when it comes to France, this is very different story. So basically week 3 and week 4 and week 5 still it's 80 and 90%, even week 6, 93. So basically it takes too much time. Now, some people argue that, hey, chronology media guarantees some films, exhibit at movie theater, and this is good. But actually this is not, because from consumer's perspective, they go to movie theater in 2 weeks later, but still they can see the same films or same movie is in the movie theater. By contrast, in Korea, 2 weeks later, people, they can see new movie. Some people gonna argue, hey, this is not good. But then, well, remember there is still streaming service and then TV and the cable TV and a lot of other outlets where we can enjoy the old films. Okay, so this is one of the big difference between Korea and France. And then actually, this is pretty good because when it comes to Korean film industry, if the film industry, the films doesn't do really well at movie theater, they shift the outlet in order to make money. Because when you produce money, the production cost is very important, especially when it comes to small and medium-sized companies. They have to recover the production cost as soon as possible. So once they know that it is not working at box office, then they shift to another outlet in order to make money. Okay, so this is actually helping small and medium-sized companies. All right, so basically just to conclude this presentation, a lot of Korean people and some people, they argue Korea has a huge problem with the monopoly, but here we highlight the comparative aspect, especially when it comes to Korean film industry. They always argue France is doing much better in terms of cultural diversity and the film policies, but then actually it is not true. Okay, so basically, you need to actually compare two countries or more than two and to see, how it works. Another thing, actually, competition measure is pretty good, actually. A lot of people, they believe that when it comes to cultural industries, protection is more important. But when it comes to Korea, actually, this is not protection, but it is like, more like a competition measures. So the companies, they know how to play with the market. If they feel like the trend of audience, they are for, really artistic or cultural films, and these Korean companies, they are ready to produce culture and artist films. When the audience are ready to see commercialized films, and the Korean companies, they are ready to produce commercialized films. So basically, they are very versatile. Okay, some people argue, put commercial success and then cultural power in dichotomization, but I argue actually no, it is not. Commercial success can promote also cultural power. This is very clear with the Korean case because a lot of Korean companies, they produce good films in order to have commercial success. Of course, the directors, they also inject their artistic value and cultural value along with cultural success value. Okay, so actually this is good to increase the cultural power. Now, when it comes to cultural diversity, people, they just argue that, hey, we just block foreign films and this is the best way. But actually, from Korean perspective, this is not. Okay, when it comes to France, cultural diversity is like protecting French films from others. But from Korean perspective, cultural diversity doesn't mean it is by the nationality, but basically the number of films that audience can enjoy. It doesn't matter where they are from. So you have to understand what cultural diversity is. Also, actually, cultural diversity is related to cultural excellence because you have to produce something really good that consumers like, and this is the best way to increase cultural diversity. So this is all about my presentation. Thank you very much.
So how do you, that mean the good thing we'll have to get questions from the audience, if I may use this term. And what are the questions that, the points that you did not understand and the questions that are still in your mind after this brief presentation? We have to rush, of course, because it's very complicated stuff, but we hope that, okay, so. So how we handle that, Jimmy?
Okay, I'm gonna go first to to the question. It's a great question actually. What's the role of subsidy in sector success? US had highest subsidies. France and UK are similar. All right. France and UK subsidy is very different from US subsidy. If you see just the number of subsidy, actually US film receive a lot of subsidies. Yes, it is true. But actually, in order to better understand, you have to go deeper. The interesting thing is actually the US at the federal government level, they do not have any subsidy scheme at all. However, because of the film industry is highly related to tourism, from some aspect, actually it's not US federal government, but actually each individual US states, they try to give subsidy to film industry. Okay, so basically they said, oh, okay, this film shoot in Michigan or Mississippi, and then the states, they are expecting some sort of tourism. Okay, so actually each states, they are in competition to give subsidies to film industries. And then since each individual states are in competition, so basically there is peer pressure, so they are increasing subsidy compared to others. And then, of course, when U.S. states, individual states are in competition, actually, it's the Hollywood studios who are benefiting this kind of game. So basically, this is the case. All right. So this is why you can see there is a high level of subsidies when it comes to U.S. But when it comes to France and UK, it's very different. Okay. Of course, France believe that giving subsidy is good to protect the film industry or to boost the film industry, and then they allocate a bunch of different subsidies, and then sometimes it's really complicated. What is there for? All right, and then UK has a very similar aspect. But one interesting thing is actually the French government, they do subsidy a lot of things. Basically, already from the cartoon that Patrick showed, if somebody just claimed that I'm going to shoot a film, then basically they give subsidies. Okay. However, because there's a lot of people who are applying for French subsidies, then they said, all right, then we're going to do some kind of culture or cultural qualification. So that means basically there are a certain number of people who are analyzing the application for subsidies in France, and then they check it. Oh, this is good for French culture. Oh, this is good for French, tradition. Oh, it is in French language. Okay, so in fact, the subsidy in France is giving to certain people who produce film that please certain number of evaluators, not the audiences. So this is very different. This is one of the reasons the French films are not really popular in the box office. Okay, now when it comes to UK, it's a little bit different. UK already know that the Hollywood film industry is really big, and then when they do a lot of things, it can be related to good business. Basically, if a company or if a studio shoot a film here and there, that means basically there's a lot of staff and they have to go to a restaurant and then accommodation. So basically, there's a lot of money going on. So UK government tried to attract this kind of foreign, movie studios, for example, notably like Hollywood. So basically, a lot of money is allocated to attract, foreign studios like Hollywood, and then they are promoting co-production. Okay, so increasing, for example, like several years ago, there's a film like Gravity, and then of course, if you see the film, there are two American people with American accent, Sandra Bullock and then George Clooney. But then actually, because this one is received a lot of UK subsidies, so the UK people or UK government actually try to highlight that actually Gravity is not American film, but it can be also UK film. And then in 2014, I think, the Gravity received the best UK film. Okay, so this is the big difference between UK and US and France. Hope any answer? Yes.
Just to add one point to what Jimmy was saying, subsidies are often inconsistent. You give subsidies, for example, for helping domestic studios producing domestic films. This is the case in France. And then you give subsidies for domestic studios producing foreign films. But in fact, then the subsidies are each, these two types of subsidies are going each against the other. I mean, you gave subsidies to help Mr. A, but you gave subsidies to help Mr. B. And in fact, when you help one of these two guys, you don't help the other. It's by definition. A quick example: we give subsidies to the theaters. Who are the main beneficiaries of the French subsidies to the theater in order, to have up-to-date theaters? The US films, because the US films are using the most up-to-date technology. So in fact, they are the main beneficiaries of the French subsidies to the French theater. You have to be very careful about the end user of the subsidies you are giving. And in fact, this is the reason why there is so many problems in Europe.
Okay, the second question is there. So can you confirm Korea has domestic contents quota for cinema and TV? Does Korea also have contents? Okay, all right. Okay, this is interesting question. So basically, it was yesterday. I got an email from a journalist in New York City, and then she was in a hurry to publish an article, and then she wanted to know if I'm aware of the Australia introduced the streaming contents quotas. Of course, yes, I know it. And then she was asking, how it works, in Europe and how it works in Korea. When it comes to streaming service, such as Netflix and Amazon, Korea does not have any quota streamers. Okay. However, when it comes to number, well, the reporter yesterday, the journalist from New York yesterday, she said, when it comes to the number of content, actually, Korea is number 2 after US. Okay. Now, this is very interesting. If you have a Netflix in Korea, you go there and then you can see there's a bunch of Korean content. Okay. And then we don't have any quota for streamer. And then this is very interesting, actually. Without any streaming quota, actually Korean companies able to produce quality content. It has been known for years. Okay, from US perspective, for example, Netflix, in Korea, because there's a high competition in terms of production. So basically the production companies, they are welcoming money from Netflix. Okay, so they are in competition. Without much investment, they are able to invest really good quality content. So basically, a lot of contents are produced, and they are also consumed not only in Korea but also in other countries, especially a lot of Asian countries. So basically, although we don't have any quota for streamer, but still it works pretty good. And then a lot of people, they just join Netflix in order to enjoy Korean content in Asia. This is very interesting. Now, when it comes to cinema, movie theater, we do not have quota, but we do have a screen quota, which is different. But then screen quota was introduced a long time ago, but now it is kind of misused by the movie theater. Okay, but that is a little bit complicated. Now, for TV, yes, we do have quota, but this one is kind of meaningless because the quota set up a long time ago, and then basically a lot of Korean TVs already produce really quality contents. So basically, we already, it's minimum, but then, basically in Korea, we do not care about the quota. So if you talk to somebody from TV industry, they said, oh yeah, we do have quota, but it doesn't work. It is useless.
We have a question, Jimmy?
Yes. Some other questions or comment? No, not more. Patrick, do you have anything special? Or you want to talk about the chronology media because I mentioned it several times?
Well, and the chronology des médias, it's something, the French are organizing about the chronology des médias. Again, you have now several groups of film producers, which are the studios, Canal+, TV specialized in cinema, the other TV channels, and of course, the streaming companies. And we have to organize, at least the French have put themselves in the corner to organize a set of windows, we call that windows, for each of these people. So the first month, only the film can be only shown in a theater. So if you have a film which is not successful, it is stuck in the theater for 4 months. You cannot show it elsewhere. It's just you have to wait the end of the 3 months. And on the contrary, of course, the economic reasoning will suggest that the person, the movie producer, which suddenly realized that his movie has no success, could say, okay, let's go to the streaming company and maybe I will find some place to put my film on TV screens. But it can't, because for a film to be in France, for being a film, you have to be watched in cinema, and then you get subsidies. So if he renounces to cinemas, he has to renounce, this movie producer has to renounce to subsidies. He can't. He has accepted the subsidies, yeah. So basically he cannot reimburse the subsidy. So the people have to wait. Then after 4 months, you enter the DVD and the transactional VOD. They have 6 other months, and then you have Canal+, and then 17 months later, after the release date, 15 months or 17 months later, you have Netflix and the other guys. But they have to wait 15 to 17 months. It's a long time in the film industry. So of course, and for that, they have to pay. They have to accept what we call nicely financial contribution, which is basically a tax or equivalent of a tax, in order to give them a screen access to Windows after 15 months or 17 months. And then after 22 months, you have the other TV. So when all these people are gathered in Ministère de la Culture for CNC for the discussion on who get first, it's just a fight, terrible fight to be the first, because they always want to be the first. So they have to pay, and that's something which is really making the current system extremely unpopular, including among the industry. And that's new, because so far the industry was enjoying the subsidies, but now the compensation to get subsidies, it's really not to be free to show you a movie when you want. So that's the chronology des médias. Jimmy, you know a lot about co-production.
Okay. By making new type of contents available. All right. Well, actually, I met some people in Korea and then regarding the co-production agreement. This is interesting because if you see the number of co-production between EU and Korea, actually the number is very not visible. Okay. Instead, you can see there's a number of co-production film between Korea and France, so based country basis. Now, when it comes to co-production, this is interesting. I published several papers regarding co-production. Co-production means basically it's a collaboration with some foreign companies. That means basically it should be based on economic rationals. For example, a company feel like they need some input from other countries, then they can do it. But the co-production agreement, actually, it clarifies if you want to receive a certain amount of subsidies, then you have to do this and that and that. So basically, it is not really in the company-friendly regulation, but it is basically the state. They said, okay, the contribution should be 50-50. But sometimes some companies, they don't feel like, it should be 50-50, all right? So basically, this is another, issue. And then Korean companies, they feel like, I don't need 50-50. I just need, like a 25 or 30 or something. But then, this is difficult. Also, another one is it's not country-based, but EU and Korea. And then the co-production agreement, if you go over, actually, it says, there should be more than 3 countries. Okay, then now, when it comes to 3 countries, it is more complicated because each country, they have very, very different in the background. And then you have to speak in not only English sometimes, but also you have to speak local language. And then, so it's more complicated. So, this is one thing the Korean, film producers, they complain. They said, because this one, we have to have more than 3 partners. And then there's a lot of, regulations, and then we have to do this and that and that. And sometimes, and then a lot of, European companies, they are interested in receiving subsidies. So they are highlighting, if we have to do this one in order to meet the requirement, so we can receive subsidies. While Korean companies, sometimes they are not interested in subsidies. They just want to produce good films by using some foreign inputs. So this is one of the thing. If EU is interested in okay. So if EU is interested in if EU is interested in promoting co-production with Korea, they have to revise the agreement. It should be more friendly toward business and companies. Otherwise, I do not see any or much improvement. Okay. Billion US dollar to respond to competition from streamer. Well, okay. Korean government today. Okay. Korean government, but I'm not sure because we did it, but it has been a long time. It's not just the first time. It's not the money, but there are several companies who try to do something, to compete with American, streamers. But so far it looks like, without government subsidies, there are certain, streamers, they are able to be in competition with, the US, streamer. Yeah, Korean government announced some kind of subsidies, but we're gonna see. It's kind of hard to expect. I mean, or first foretell something, but we will see. Okay, the importance is not it's just money, but then how you use the money, and for which company we're gonna use the money. So this is very important. All right, this is 33.5, and then we plan to finish this one at 3:30. So I guess this is all. If you have any further questions, please send us email. And then I appreciate